Hey, world history. This is Miss Corey. Welcome to U7-L5, Women in the Middle Ages in the Eastern Orthodox Church. All right, we don't have a lot to get through today, but I'll still probably talk pretty fast. So, your job, you're going to watch this U7-L5 Ed puzzle and answer the questions that appear directly on the Ed puzzle. I will be grading on what questions you get right or wrong. So, there's nothing for you to write in your study guide today. Just watch the video and answer the questions. Learning targets: identify the role of women of upper and lower classes, identify laws directed at women in the Middle Ages, and describe the similarities and differences between Western Europe and the Byzantine Empire, and describe the similarities and differences between the Roman Catholic and Eastern Orthodox churches. So this presentation will be split into two parts. Part 1 is going to be about women in the Middle Ages. Part 2 is going to be the Eastern Orthodox Church. So pretty much it's like two separate slideshows, but I just kind of smashed them together into one slideshow. So let's get started with part 1, women in the Middle Ages. So women in the Middle Ages were labeled as inferior. So Middle Age Europe was highly influenced by Christianity, which we've talked about pretty much all this week. So popes, priests, and men in powerful positions deemed women inferior, meaning they're less than men. This all stems a lot from the biblical story of Adam and Eve. So if you are familiar with the story, you'll know that Eve, who is a woman, gave this like apple of sin to Adam, who's a man, and together they gained sin. And this is a very common theme in medieval art. So if you ever look through medieval art, um, you'll see a lot of like paintings and statues of the story of Adam and Eve. So why were women labeled as inferior as well? Is that ruling men thought that women should be like the Virgin Mary. So the Virgin Mary is the mother of Jesus. And because of that, they believe that women should be religious, they should be devoted to God and raise their kids. The Virgin Mary is a huge like art theme as well during the Middle Ages. You'll see a ton of statues of her. So, besides upper class women, women were not literate. And to be honest, men of like the lower classes were not literate too. This became a problem, like I mentioned before, because they can't read or write, meaning that there is not any trading of ideas long distances. So they couldn't contact people in like other villages and towns. So, just like ancient Rome, much of the Middle Age history was written by men. Luckily, there are some examples still that exist of women's written work, and you will read one in the next lesson. So, if a woman was in the ruling class, they did have more power than like the peasants. So, women could negotiate marriages for political alliances. They also were really important because they kept and archived collections of books in their houses. So they helped keep history in those books because they're the ones like tending to the books. They're the ones collecting them, passing them to their friends, trading the books. So because of them, a lot of the history of the Middle Ages is kept alive. And they would also influence what men read because they would be the ones who pick out the books, and whatever books they pick out, the men can read. So if she was wealthy, she could also have influence on her husband if her husband was like royalty or like part of an advisor in a court or something like that, on laws. Also, if her parents were wealthy, she could also become a nun in the Catholic Church and hold a high position as a nun. So, with young girls who are wealthy, they were educated in running the household and also how to read and write. Now, when they were taught how to read and write, it was mostly taught by reading the Bible and biographies of saints. So it wasn't like they were reading fun little adventure or romance novels. They were reading religious texts. So women would also write letters to each other, just because, well, they don't usually see each other or interact with each other on a daily basis. So most of the letters that historians have are friendship letters from one woman to another. There's also letters for invitations as well as gifts. And they could also learn foreign languages from other noble women from across Europe. So women could also send love letters, and they were educated in foreign languages, such as French and Latin as well. So women had a lot of social norms like that they physically had to do. For example, in public, they had to take tiny, elegant steps. So you couldn't walk too fast or your steps could not be too long. Had to take tiny little steps. That would be really annoying. And at social gatherings, they were permitted to pretty much only talk about their love of dogs, hunting, birds, music, and love. So, one of the really cool things about women's roles that they did have is they actually could go hunting. But typically, their hunting weapon was actually a falcon. So, like the bird, a falcon hunting. That's pretty cool. So, women were also expected to tend to the men. One of the biggest examples would be the daughters of knights. So, their dads would be like, hey, I got a knight coming in as a guest. You need to go and give him a bath, which would be so gross. Could you imagine that? Like, one of your dad's colleagues comes in and he's in his armor and he's all sweaty and greasy and grimy, and now you have to give him a bath. Ew. All right, so question number one: what were the roles of wealthy women? Okay, so let's talk about peasant women now. So, once a peasant woman was married, she was in charge of managing the household. She would also do physical labor like harvest fields with the men. There are some examples of women working outside of the house as well, such as working in certain guilds. So, a guild is an association of craftsmen. They could not just do any guild, though. It was specifically the dress and hat making guild. And they would also work mainly in textiles. So, textile is like cloth. That's what a textile means. So, they were permitted to have jobs like spinning wool, sewing, weaving, and spinning silk. And there were no real working rights for women at this time. So, for example, let's say a woman had a job and a man came and was like, hey, I need a job. I don't have one. That woman would get immediately fired so that man could work at like the textile industry or at the dressmaking guild. They also, when they worked at the textile factories, they would make these, really nice clothes like silk and stuff, but they usually wore terrible clothes because they themselves were very overworked and very underpaid. So, question two: what were the roles of peasant/working class women? So, there's a lot of laws around women in the Middle Ages and what they could and could not do. So, one of the biggest things is that women solely could not inherit land and wealth. They could inherit land and wealth, but they did not control what they inherited. Their husbands did. So, let's say, like a woman's dad passed away, okay? And let's say, like, the dad had, I don't know, like a little bit of farmland or something, for example. She herself could not rule that farmland. Her husband could rule that farmland, even though she's the one inheriting it. But they had a little bit of say in what happens to their inheritance. Like, for example, the husband had to get consent from the wife if he ever wanted to sell her inheritance. Women could also make decisions over land if their husband was out at war. One of the biggest examples of this would be in 1066 when William the Conqueror, who was the King of England, he went off to war. His wife Matilda, she made the laws and decisions over England while he was away fighting. Also, if a knight or lord went to war and died, the wife could take over the feudal land, but she had a lot of restrictions. For example, she could not bear arms. So, for example, she could not have like swords or spears or anything like that. Also, if she had to go to court over her feudal land, she could not appear in the court without either her brother or her father accompanying her. So husbands were also allowed to beat their wives if she was doing something wrong. But if she was innocent, in return, the man was publicly humiliated. And sometimes that included the wife beating the husband back. Yeah, laws are crazy in the Middle Ages. So, question number 3, what were laws like in the Middle Ages towards women? Okay, now there are quite a few examples of women with power in the Middle Ages. For example, Empress Engelberga, Matilda of Tuscany, Eleanor of Aquitaine, Blanche of Castile, Melisende of Jerusalem, and Joan of Arc. Today, we're just going to highlight one, which is Eleanor of Aquitaine. So, Eleanor of Aquitaine was a French princess, and she was very well respected because she had a very strong and charismatic personality. Her father, the king, died, and he did not have any male heirs. And this was in 1137. So she inherited the throne with the arrangement to marry Louis VII. She was 15 and he was 16. So what happened is that Louis VII and her went on a crusade to Jerusalem. Now we'll talk about crusades in a different lesson a little bit later on. But what a crusade is pretty much a war in order to take control of Jerusalem, which is the holy city, which is located in the Middle East. And it's still fought over today. So she went along with her husband on this war, but she didn't fight herself. She was just there to observe. But during the crusade, Louis VII was very unhappy with her. So he ended up divorcing her in the middle of this war in 1152. The reason why he was so mad at her was because she had only given birth to daughters. And so Eleanor was like, oh my gosh, he just divorced me. I got to get back home and I got to get back home fast. And she has to go to France. Along the way, to make her journey even more difficult, noblemen caught news that Eleanor of Aquitaine was single again. So they attempted to kidnap her and marry her because whoever would marry her would become the new king of France. So she traveled all the way from Poitiers, or from Jerusalem to Poitiers, France, which at that time was under, it was like this little chunk of land of France that was under control of England. And there she was saved by Duke Henry Plantagenet. I don't know how to say his last name, to be honest. So here's a map of what I'm talking about. So she was all the way over here in Jerusalem on this like crusade war. Her husband divorces her. She has to get back to France. So she has to travel all of this way back to France. And along that journey, there are noblemen trying to kidnap her. Gosh, that'd be awful. So she ended up marrying Duke Henry, who helped save her. So Henry became the King of England in 1154. And now, not only did King Henry rule England, but since he married Eleanor of Aquitaine, he now rules all of France as well. So both France and England come under one rule of King Henry. And a lot of this came out of revenge for the nobles who wanted to kidnap and marry Eleanor. That's one of the big reasons why she married Henry, is to kind of, be spiteful and be like, haha, I'm going to marry Henry. And guess what? We're going to combine England and France together. And together they had 5 sons. So it was not a very happy marriage. Henry was cheating on Eleanor with a mistress. Eleanor got so mad at him that she just fled the castle. She just left. Also, she still holds some power even after that. For example, one of her sons, and probably one of the most famous people in Western Europe history during the Middle Ages, was this dude named Richard the Lionhearted, who's this dude right up here. So that was her son. And when he went into battle, he actually left the governing of the land to her. So she governed Richard the Lionhearted land for 4 years while he was off at war. So Richard the Lionhearted got captured in 1194, and Eleanor took it upon herself, and she actually paid most of the ransom money in order to get him freed. Eventually, she got sick of all the politics, and she retired to a convent, which is where nuns live, and died at the very old age of 82, which I know 82, like today, like it's old, but it's not like really old. But remember, The Middle Ages was not a very nice place to live. If any of you watched the hygiene video back in the video choice, you would know that, well, hygiene was not great. So it's pretty amazing she lived to 82. So women could also kind of find power in the clergy. So nuns and other religious women also had a lot of power. I didn't talk very much about them. If you want any resources, you can let me know. All right, let's move on to part 2, Eastern Orthodox Church in the Byzantine Empire. All right, so the Byzantine Empire, we talked about this a lot. I kind of shortened their name up to BE in the slideshow, by the way, just so I don't have to write it all out. And we talked about how they abandoned the western part of the old Roman Empire. They also were too many Germanic local tribes trying to take over the West, so that's one of the reasons why they totally left Italy, and they didn't have the military force to maintain it. They also left the city of Rome and the Pope behind, although they still consider themselves the Roman Empire, even though they abandoned the city of Rome. And they were also betrayed by Pope Leo when he crowned Charlemagne, the Roman emperor, in 800. I know we talked about that in the last lesson video. So here is a map of what the Byzantine Empire looked like. So you can see it has parts of the southern Italy, parts of what is like Greece, and then into Turkey. So the Byzantine Empire was ruled by an emperor, or in the one case scenario, an empress. So this is Empress Theodora, by the way. And the empire was not fractured like in the West, where the West had all these like little territories. The Byzantine Empire was a whole empire. But they still had a lot of troubles. Like, for example, in the Byzantine Empire, the economy had a lot of lows. It had a lot of points where it was really bad. So a lot of the poor farmers would sell their land to aristocrats or nobles in order to pretty much live and not go bankrupt. So, although the West and the East split, there was still a lot of contact between Western Europe and the Byzantine Empire. A big example of that would be like the Byzantine Empire, or the Byzantine Empire prince Romanus II would end up marrying a noble lady from Italy. There's also a lot of exchanging of ideas during this time period. For example, medical and historical texts were exchanged. There was also technologies that were exchanged. For example, papermaking was introduced by the Islamic ruled Spain in the about 1000 CE. All right, so next up, we're going to talk about the splitting of the churches. So between Constantine's reign, so we talked about him way back in Unit 4, and that was back in 306 CE, until 1054, the Catholic Church was united for both the Western Europe and the Byzantine Empire until something called the Great Schism happened. And that happened in 1054. And that's when the Catholic Church split into two. Okay. In the West, you would have the Roman Catholic Church. Their capital would be in Rome, Italy. It is still there today. In the East, you have the Eastern Orthodox Church. Their capital is in Constantinople, which is today called Istanbul, Turkey. And it is still there today. So here's a map of the Great Schism. So over here in the West, we have the Catholic Church. Headquarters is in Rome. Over here in purple, we have the Eastern Orthodox Church with the headquarters in Constantinople. So there are 4 main reasons why the church split in 1054. Now, some of these reasons seem like, seriously, they split because of this. They seem not dumb, but very questionable, I guess. But it happened. This is really what happened. So the first reason why the church split in half is because Pope Leo crowned Charlemagne in 800, and that was seen as treasons in the eyes of the Byzantine Empire. The second one, and yes, this is real, it was the use of unleavened bread at communion. So communion in Christianity, specifically like in the Catholic Church, it's like a piece of bread that a priest gives you and the priest blesses it, and like it's believed to be like Jesus himself. So in the West, they did not want to use yeast in the bread, so it'd be nice and flat. In the East, they wanted the yeast, so it'd be nice and puffy bread. Yeah, seriously, this was one of the reasons why the church split. The third reason is that the wording in the Nicene Creed, we talked about this back in the Unit 4, but what it was a declaration of what specifically Christians believe in. There's some wording issues over it that they got kind of defensive about. And the fourth reason is priests should be married or not. And the Eastern Orthodox Church was like, yeah, priests can marry. Why not? And the Roman Catholic Church are like, no way, priests cannot be married. So to this day, there are still split in the Roman Catholics and the Eastern Orthodox. And you can find both religions across the globe. It's not just an East-West split anymore. And their leaders today are on friendly terms. So the leader of the Eastern Orthodox Church is called the Ecumenical Patriarch of Constantinople. And the leader of the Roman Catholic Church is the Pope. And you can see them here. This is them. They look happy. So again, those are the two leaders. So in our local community, for example, Mary Queen of Peace in Rogers, the Cathedral in St. Paul, and the Church of St. Andrew in Elk River, those are all Roman Catholic churches. You can go down to Minneapolis and see the St. Michael Orthodox Church, and that is an Eastern Orthodox church. So question 4, what are the differences between Western Europe and the Byzantine Empire? Question 5, why did the Catholic Church split into the Roman Catholic and Eastern Orthodox churches? All right, let's wrap this up. Today we talked about the roles of women, like the wealthy, the peasants, and working class, laws of women, and Eleanor of Aquitaine. There's the differences and similarities between Western Europe and the Byzantine Empire, as well as the Great Schism. Next up, we're going to do U7-L6, Women's Writing in the Middle Ages Reading. So what you need to do first is you need to click on the reading link. It'll take you to a document. Read it first, then go on and take the U7-L6 Women's Writing in the Middle Ages quiz. The quiz is about the reading. After that, you're going to do U7, L7, L8, and L9, which are the Dark Ages. That is a documentary made by the History Channel, and it's literally going through the Dark Ages / the Middle Ages. And it's a pretty good documentary. You know, the History Channel is really good at making documentaries that aren't super boring. They're somewhat engaging. It's also the same company that makes our textbook. I will be grading on what questions you get right or wrong, so make sure you are paying attention. Then after that, you're going to meet me back for U7-L10, The Power of the Church. If you have any questions, comments, or simply want to learn more, please let us know. We are here to help you. All right, bye.